And we're live.
Hello and welcome to Hershey Area All Things Diversity. My name is Fanatia Brookwa and I am the assistant to the president at Milton Hershey School for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We are pleased to be a part of Hershey Area All Things Diversity, a community-based group that seeks to educate, create awareness, and promote acceptance and inclusion in our community. The group is organized by members from Dairy Township, and I am going to read this list because I don't want to forget anybody. Dairy Township School District, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, Penn State Health, the Hershey Company, the Hershey Story Museum, the Downtown Hershey Association, the Hershey Trust Company, and Milton Hershey School. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We are probably all here because we may be struggling with how to have conversations about race and racism, not only within our own circles, so it may be even more challenging to think about how do we approach this topic with young people and children. So we have allowed this topic of race and racism to be taboo for far too long, and we know and we're experiencing that silence is damaging. I want to just preface this by saying we are not claiming to have all of the answers, but like many of you, we are on a journey and we're trying to be intentional about a focus to elevate student voice, especially within our unique setting at Milton Hershey School. So, for those of you who are not aware, our students live in student homes with a married couple. And those couples aren't their biological parents, but caregivers who are in a unique caregiving role. So you can imagine the thoughtfulness and care that is needed to approach such topics with our young people who have demonstrated to us that they want to be heard, they want a platform to speak, and they really want to speak about what's happening in our nation. So tonight, we are committed to breaking the silence, and thought leaders from Milton Hershey School will provide practical approaches on how to engage youth in discussions about race and racism. But But before I continue with the panel, I want to just make a note that our program is being broadcasted live on YouTube. So for those watching, please feel free to pose any questions in the comment section, and those questions will be addressed at the end of our time here together tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists for this evening, Jerome Presley, psychotherapist at Milton Hershey School, Charisse Johnson, coordinator of student character and leadership development, Jonathan Small, area supervisor for our transitional living program, Heather Teeter, senior manager of student health services within our middle division program, and our special guests for tonight are student speakers, Lyndon Gregory, an 11th grader at Milton Hershey School, Samira Bird, an 11th grader at Milton Hershey School, and Naomi Oladeju, a 10th grader at Milton Hershey School. Thank you, panelists. Second, as I share my screen here. So with that, we are going to dive right into our conversation tonight. And this first slide speaks for itself. If you are out there and you are waiting to be an expert to create a space for young people to have a discussion, we are encouraging you, please don't. It's okay if you're not the expert, but this is also not an excuse to be openly offensive or not focused to educate yourselves when you have the opportunity. However, we want to make sure that we don't miss opportunities for allowing a space for young people to be heard because you may not be ready or your organization or what you're affiliated with may not be where you want to be. So there's no judgment today. This is about reflection. It's about introspection and ways where you can figure out where to begin. One way that we have done such at Milton Hershey School is through our student voice forums. And it's a platform where you can allow children to be heard through, again, forums. That might sound foreign when you think about this in a family setting, but it's really nothing more than setting the platform for your family to get together to have a discussion like you would in a family meeting. And then you set norms to determine how you want to engage with each other in that space. So Charisse Johnson, I've coined her the queen of student voice with the creation of our Project Growth Student Voice Forums. I'm going to allow Charisse to speak to how we've structured that space in our setting for our young people and how this platform can be replicated. Charisse?
Thank you, Fanati. When preparing to have a difficult conversation with youth, it's important to set those group norms. It's extremely important to have clear expectations for the students so that they know what to expect in that setting. We want to ensure our students are feeling comfortable and are able to be open in having those conversations so that they can share their thoughts and perspectives without judgment. So we set these group norms ahead of time. And as you see on the screen here, these are the youth voice forum expectations that we have here at the Milton Hershey School, and they're centered around our sacred values. So our sacred values are listed on the left-hand side of the screen as the expectation that we expect for our students, which are mutual respect, integrity, positive spirit, and commitment to mission. So we created the expected behaviors to surround the sacred values so that the students know that this is what we expect when we have these conversations. And for mutual respect, it's the general respect yourself and others, and for integrity, to be honest and open while we're having that discussion and take care of yourself. For positive spirit, we want to make sure that you have positive intention and that you seek to understand that it's okay to make mistakes. Like Mrs. Abrokwa said, we don't expect everyone to know everything. So making sure that they know right up front that it's okay to make mistakes and own that as well. And commitment to mission is our last sacred value that we put there to make sure that there's no distractions during our forums, that we give our full attention, and we are being intentional in our space. We want to be fully present for everyone and have that respect for everyone in those settings. And other agreements that you can use to encourage dialogue in your own settings. For instance, if you wanted to create your own in your classrooms or your groups or at home, you can create some like practice active listening, don't interrupt, assume good intentions, and you can write these out, place them on the walls around you, or just make sure that they're in a common space so that your students or your family see them, and it's something that they adapt on a regular basis and they are expected when you have those conversations with your students. And Jerome, my colleague Jerome, he's on here as well. He will share some tips for parents when facing difficult conversations with youth.
Thank you, Charisse. Like Charisse said, it's very difficult for some people. They have their children and they don't know, maybe not know what to say or how to talk to their students. And it's important, as we've talked about, to understand that it's okay to not know initially. It's okay to understand that you don't have to be this professional expert. I myself, as a psychotherapist, I'm also a father as well, and having those difficult conversations can happen at any given time. And sometimes with our busy day, we don't know when the best time to have those conversations are. And sometimes they kind of happen for us. So it's important for us to be available, being in the moment. And sometimes that conversation could take place sitting at a light in your car. It could take place over dinner. It can take place when you're watching TV or when you see something on TV or just any place it could happen, and just being available. And of course, we understand that sometimes it's not appropriate to have those conversations at certain times. And we as parents know when those times may come up. It's always important for parents if you can ask questions, and that continues to keep our kids engaged, and the ability to continue to think through different situations to help them understand. And it's important to help them understand that there are different points of view. And even though those points of view may not always jive with ours, or we may disagree, it's okay to respect that other people will have a point of view that could be different from our own. And then it's okay to revisit topics. And as I talked about earlier, we may have a situation where we may not be able to have that conversation at a specific time, and we may need to revisit those topics. So it's important to make time to touch base on those things that were discussed and clarify any concerns that may have come up from our students or our children. Back to you, Fanati.
Thank you, Charisse and Jerome. And I think it's important to note that we will later speak to some of those probing questions that you can ask to really get young people to think critically about situations and not tell them what they should think. And so we'll speak to that a little bit later. But I just also wanted to point out that, as Jerome mentioned, this can be modified for a family setting. So we want to be certain that you understand that when we talk about family, we know that families just doesn't mean, teens or young adults. So this can actually be modified for children as young as 2 to 4. And we need to be mindful that we shouldn't assume that young children at that age don't see race and are colorblind. We'll talk about later about some barriers to conversations and those false narratives regarding conversations, and that so young children at that age have opinions too, and they start to see the differences at a very young age. So we want to let you all know that those conversations can start that young, and you would rather have them start with your guidance than for them to have at that early age misinformation from what they're seeing and viewing. So with that, it's a perfect segue into young children's school age. Kat and John, giving your experiences as parents to school age children, and Kat, especially your experience as an elementary teacher here at Milton Hershey School, can you share particularly what's worked in your own home or with young children?
Hey, I'm Caregivers and I teach 4th grade at Milton Hershey School, and I have quite a bit of experience teaching the younger children. When we think about younger children, really what we want to be doing is thinking about their environment and thinking about maybe the limits to their environment. So younger children are not exposed like us adults, and as they grow and the more experiences these children have, well, their exposure to different cultures and races will continue. So what we want to do is make our children ready for the conversation. And it's a fix you can do, but one good tip is look at your kids' bookshelf. Look at the books that you have on the bookshelf and really think about the characters in those books. Are they representative of different cultures, races, abilities? Are the characters in the stories having a similar time to your child, or are they having different experiences? And if you look at that bookshelf and you are seeing that the stories are not quite there, go ahead when you go out to the shop to buy another book, really think about, well, maybe I should buy a book with different races in that book, or a multicultural book. And what you do by doing that is expose your child to a plethora of people and places that they might not have even met yet. And when you have that, you make them ready for conversations, because you're not having to explain, well, there are different people. You've already set that stage. The other thing you might want to do is look at the dolls and the action figures in your kids' toy box. Have you got the beautiful array that represents our world outside? Or is it pretty much similar with we're all the same race? And if it is all the same race, that's fine. But why not add a little bit more into that? Because what you want your child to get is a reflection of the real world. You want them to better understand the conversations when they come. And so by giving them the audience of books, toys, you're expanding their environment, you're expanding their experience, and you're giving them that little something extra. Another thing I would really think about would be language. Language that we use with children needs to be child speak. If you're talking to a child and they don't understand the words you're saying, well, the conversation is lost. So make sure when you have that difficult conversation, if you're speaking to a 5-year-old, you've got to use language your 5-year-old will understand. Relatable words, understandable scenarios. So one of my colleagues, John, who's going to talk on the next slide, was telling me one scenario he says is when his child fell over and hurts her knee, the knee hurts and the body needs to be fixed, but we don't put a plaster on the elbow. We actually put a plaster on the knee because that's what needs fixing. And you can use that scenario with the community to talk about like if we have a community member that needs help, we've got to help that person And yeah, so you can use relatable scenarios to help your children out. Also, check your own language and your children's language. So if they're trying a food or they're experiencing something and they say, ooh, that's weird. No, it's not weird. It's just normal. And if you just keep plugging away at these little things by saying, hey, no, that's normal for certain people, you're basically saying, hey, this world is bigger than what we have, what we're exposed to, and you're adding on. And always be truthful to your children. Really important. They deserve the truth. The last thing I'm going to talk about is being an example. Children emulate what they see. So if you're an adult and you go and talk to someone in not so nice a way, your children see that. They have that spidey sense. So you need to be sure the way you treat people is how you want your children to treat people when they grow up. It might be that you need to seek to clarify yourself. You might need to go and think about things, and that's okay, because like we said before, not everyone's an expert. Children need to see you positively interact with other people. They need to see you positively interact with a diverse group of people of different religions, cultures, races, heritage, abilities. And when they see you positively interact, they look at you and go, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So that's just my outlook on exposure, language, and being an example. So John's going to talk about this slide.
Thanks, Kath. Very well said. And it's nice to meet all of you all virtually. As Fanati said, my name is Jonathan Small. I work with seniors right now, and I've worked with high school age youth. And I've also taught 8th grade, taught 5th grade, but my real expertise here is with my 6-year-old. And so that's why I'm here to kind of give some thoughts on what parenting has looked like from this perspective with regard to teaching and helping her learn. A 10-month-old will get there someday. But Kath really captured a lot of what we really want to make sure you all hear in terms of exposure, in terms of being intentional, and in terms of shared experiences. But I'll just add on a couple things that, and really mentors of mine and through reading of my own really taught me that it's one thing to have a child exposed to, and we want to do that. And there's another layer to exposure, as in reading and reading books from multicultural authors, from backgrounds different from your own, watching films, watching shows that have characters that are different look different, talk different than your background. Kids will pick up on that. Implicit learning is going to happen no matter what we do with our children. But one of the things that is really important is that didactic learning, where we're sitting with them, pressing pause on the movie that we're watching, giving time for them to input and say, reflect on the scene, or if in that movie, because not all movies are going to be perfectly just the story we want to show and it just be this amazing experience, pause and talk through a situation that happened in the movie, or a character's choice, or a character's language. And then the same thing with books, asking questions after the book, and just really pressing pause on life. And Mr. Presley Drome mentioned that earlier. Sometimes that is creating space and time for our children at that young age, that impressionable age, to make sure we can input into their learning. And Kath mentioned a lot of the shared experiences, so that when we are what we do and where we go and who we interact with as a family unit is going to really, that's going to teach our young people what we believe and value, and their schema is going to be what they experience and see. And so it's really important to be cognizant of and think about maybe attending places like maybe different houses of worship, maybe going to different locations that aren't your normal area, where people look like you and talk like you. Maybe experimenting with a language that you took back in high school and you want to show that you have some knowledge with it. I speak Spanish with my children. I have a little bit of a Spanish background. I'm relearning myself. So those are really important those kind of things are important to make sure that you're walking through life doing that with your kids. And then another thing is just to use the world's news and the world's events as a learning laboratory, as it were, for your children. I mean, it's it's fun to celebrate anything. We all know that. And it can be really fun to kind of just take something that is a global event that you would never have celebrated likely in your life and in the lives of your children. Maybe they've not experienced it, but to make an event of it and expose them to a different cultural tradition and do that. And then I think the last thing I'll end on, and Kathy, you hit this really well, was just being a role model to your students. I think it was already a tall order to be a role model to youth with whom I worked. And then I saw this little walking, talking me with the same eyes, and I thought, she is watching everything I do. So just be mindful of that. And thanks for coming on and learning with us. And thanks, Ms. Broca, back to you.
So thank you, Kat and John. And I just wanted to point out a few things that stood out to me. And one of the things that I think is important that I just want to share with the audience is that when we talk about representation, and Kat mentioned what's in your libraries, what's on your bookshelves, what movies are you watching? And many times when we think of representation, we often think that representation is important just for our children who are of color. But representation matters for everyone. And so as you're exploring and you're looking for representation, whether you're an educator, whether you're a parent, to remember that that does not just apply to your non-white students or to students of color or children of color. Representation matters across the spectrum, and you're really broadening experiences for young people when you make sure that representation is for all. And so just wanted to point that out, but I also love the examples of, again, exposure, what they're experiencing, what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and then being intentional about teaching to that and challenging that. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? Again, based on exposure. And so we'll talk again a little bit later about those probing questions you can use in those settings when you have to pause the movie because maybe there's a stereotype that's been referenced. And that happens very early on. If you've noticed lately in Disney movies, the older Disney movies are now putting a caveat before the movie starts that this program may have references to stereotypes or may have references to bias. And so be mindful of that. At that age, they are receiving that messaging. So when you hear that and when you see that, when you're watching, and I encourage you to watch even these Disney movies with your children, because then you can walk alongside of them and stop and pause and be intentional about those moments. So that is a perfect segue into our next developmental stage of early, middle, late adolescence. And we know at this age, they are being flooded at this point with what they're seeing in the media, what they're taking in, with their screen time. So it's important at this stage to be mindful of that. And Heather, who I mentioned before, is our senior, works in our middle division and also has children within this age, will speak to how you engage young people who are in this developmental stage. And here's when you typically see that they want to start to have their own independent thought that's often coupled and influenced by their peers and by media and by all those messages that they're hearing. So Heather, I am going to toss off the mic to you.
Thanks, Fanati. So our speakers have really set a great foundation for jumping into this stage with talking about some strategies to use with our young school-age children, as so many of the principles that we've already heard about really apply when we work with teens and young adolescents. So as adults and educators and parents, we really have to listen to what our students are saying rather than talking at them. And it's really important to give some space to allow our students to share with us what they know, rather than us as adults telling them what we think are the facts. As we've heard, our kids are really being inundated now with things that they have access to. They, as John pointed out, our kids are living in a world where they have access to social media and other sources of information that they're hearing from their peers, and they want to share it with us. So this is our time to really seek to understand what they know by asking questions rather than passing judgment on what they're sharing with us. So some ways to respond include giving space for kids to explore their feelings and their ideas, their thoughts about events or content they're hearing, issues that are going on, or something that they've heard. So as Fanani mentioned, I worked with young adolescents, and I actually have 2 teenage daughters myself. And kids sometimes will come up to adults and say something like, "Did you know?" or "Did you hear?" and then proceed to share the story or their opinion about something. And what I find is that this is really the time that they have something that they've seen posted online or they've heard from their peer, and this is really a chance, as we've heard, actually Jerome shared earlier, that with his own daughter and his own children, that this is a time to really give that space to, rather than debate about facts, it's a great opportunity to have that meaningful conversation about their reactions to what they've read or they've heard about, and how they feel about the information, and even really engage in that conversation about what they believe could be done, what action could be taken if they believe change is needed. So it's just really a great opportunity to actually have some really meaningful conversation. So conversations about race and racism might not be comfortable, but we have to step into that discomfort. And the first step is really leveraging the conversation so that these conversations aren't taboo and should be part of the developmental conversations. Silence can be much more damaging than saying the wrong things. If you set common norms and a tone for understanding that are rooted in mutual respect, we can make amends for our mistakes. But if we stay silent because we're afraid that young people can become victims of harmful messaging, and that can do a lot more damage, and that's much harder to repair. So this is really our time to listen, learn, and grow together.
Awesome, thank you. So I am going to pause here for just a moment. And before we switch gears, I just want to highlight that the books that you see here on the screen are also displayed at the Hershey Library. So if you have an opportunity to check those out, do so. They're again displayed at the Hershey Library. Also, these resources will be linked in the YouTube, I believe, and posted on the ATD All Things Diversity page. So again, I just wanted to pause to allow you a chance to soak in, write down these resources. We will also reference additional resources at the end. But while we have these up, wanted you to take a look at these. Okay.
Yeah, so it's important to be aware of some potential barriers that you can encounter, to establish a common language, and to set some rules of engagement, and also to be self-aware. So when we're approaching conversations, you want to consider what are some of the false narratives that can arise, and how are you going to respond? Ask yourself, is there a lack of trust, and do you need support in having conversations until trust is established? And consider how you'll build that trust. Consider that as you build trust, you might have to allow others to have some control in that conversation with that young person, and what happens to your credibility during that time while you're building trust. These barriers can be overcome as long as you're open-minded, respectful, willing to learn, and engage in dialogue with students. It's also important to acknowledge that when you make a mistake, it's okay to apologize for your mistake and recognize that we all make mistakes, but we have to learn from them. It takes time to build solid, trusting relationships, but focusing on creating equitable relationships with those with whom we connect with. And we've heard about these approaches throughout the evening tonight, and we're going to continue to talk about them as we move through the rest of the program. Thank you.
So this is Charisse. So we've talked about, thank you so much, Heather, for your input on that. We've talked about how to welcome the conversation. And now we're talking about, and then we talked about how to engage in the conversation. to take in the students and young person's perspectives and thoughts. And now we want to talk about how can we empower them? How can we help them express their thoughts in a healthy way? And so this slide here is of referencing empowering youth voice. With youth voice, it's all about character building. It's so essential to make sure that young people feel empowered to use their voice in a healthy way. But as educators and parents, we have to provide that opportunity for them to express themselves in a safe way. So we talked about how a lot of our young people are using media as an outlet, and they're gaining information from the media, but we can steer them into another direction by making sure that they're engaging in a healthy way by participating in activities after school. They can participate in conferences. There are a lot of community programs that young people can be involved in. And as a parent like myself, I love crafts. I love to do crafty things. And if you're a parent that loves to do little projects and crafty things with your children, you can honestly create something that where your young people, your young persons in your home or in your group can express themselves through artistic formats, all kinds of different activities out there that allows them to express themselves. We have paint, we have arts, we have poetry, we have music. There are so many different platforms that we can use to help them express themselves in that way. And so empowering young people would help build their confidence. Once a young person is confident in who they are, that allows them to grow. That allows them to become leaders amongst their peers. And we have to pay attention to those young people that may not have found their voices yet. We have a lot of young people that are still trying to learn that. And so they learn from their peers. So that's our leaders in the schools. That's our leaders of our children that are just natural in that area. But the other students and the other youth that are struggling with that, we have to teach to it. So when I say teach to it, we have to provide them an outlet so that they can explore their own ideas and passions so that they can build the confidence to become natural leaders on their own. And then we have Jerome here that will also add a little piece to this empowerment piece as well.
Thank you, Charisse. I know many of you may have heard the old adage that children should be seen, not heard. And I think that goes against the empowerment effort to empower our youth and their voices. And I came across an article from Get Smart by Kristen Thornton and Aaron Gohl. And it was Kristen Thornton was a former educator, and Aaron was an independent writer for equity, engagement, and education. And they came up with a really nice acronym that kind of speaks to what we're talking about tonight. CVA, and it's choice, voice, and action. And when we look at choice, and we're talking about both in the school community, but also at home when you have your children there as well. But with choice, it's promote feelings of control in a child's interaction with the world around them so that they have a part to play in that and they understand it. Voice is teaching kids that their thoughts and opinions do matter and they do have a say. And like many have said, when it all's said and done, we're going to hand the baton to them to continue. And what they do with that baton will dictate the direction that our world goes in many cases. And then action. Our children have a role in the now and in making the world a better place, not just when they become older. They have that time period now. So our younger kids, you saw some of our panelists talking about our younger youth and empowering them at that age, but also age appropriately, helping them learn how to use and use their voice and be able to communicate to adults what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and what they can do with that information. And then the action. And children, as we talked about, that role in the world around us is so big. It's so important for our kids to have that opportunity to be able to express themselves and be able to understand and learn from us as the role models that we are for our kids. And that kind of goes along with lifting up under engaged voices. And I know Fanati talked about screen time. And sometimes screen time, whether we're on the fence of it being, we don't know if it's always a good thing, if it's not always a bad thing, but we know it's there. It's a part of our world today. But that screen time can have a direct impact on our ability to empower kids and empower their voices other than social media, giving youth time to explore their ideas, which is extremely important, and let youth know that what they feel and say matters. And by that, it continues to help empower them. And we have Fanati can talk more about her thoughts and any other informational resources that you may have.
Yes, yes. And before I do so, Jerome, I know we said that we wouldn't get into, this wasn't about the terminology, this wasn't about you being an expert, but I have to switch up my hat a little bit. And what you're really referring to in that advocacy, in that empowerment, in that stepping up and taking action, in that we're teaching young people how to be upstanders, right? It's the same thing when we're talking about bullying. You're saying you're not going to be a bystander to bullying. When you see racism, when you see discrimination, when you hear narratives that perpetuate stereotypes, what action are you going to take? And you're teaching young people at a young age, when you're empowering them, you're teaching them how to be an upstander in regards to standing up to racism. So I had to switch hats. I know I said I wasn't going to do that. Tonight wasn't about that, but at least you'll leave knowing what upstander means. So again, it's the same steps. If you want to teach your children that, it's the same steps to what you would do in bullying. When your child comes home and says, this is what happened, you ask them, okay, well, who did you tell about it? Is it ongoing? There's clear steps on how to address it. It's the same for situations with race and racism, and there are action steps. You have to take an action in order to eliminate something. So you did learn a term today, upstander. So I'll get off my soapbox here, and we're gonna switch gears just a little bit because our special speakers tonight are gonna switch. We're gonna switch off our hats from our adult panelists, and not that you all weren't great, but I'm sure the audience wants to hear from these wonderful, wonderful young people who have taken the time to gather their thoughts and share their perspective on what they want from us as caregivers, as teachers, as educators, and how they want us to engage and approach this conversation with them. So with that, I'm switching gears a little bit, and I am going to pick on Samira first. So Samira, in your words, tell us why it's important for adults and caregivers to talk to youth about race and racism.
Thank you, Ms. Obrokwa. In case any of you missed it, again, my name's Samaya. I think race is something that everybody should talk about. I think it's important for adults to talk to youth about race because race is one of those topics that we see every day in our lives that's never going away. For me, I see race all the time on the news. I see it appear in the media, and I see it all the time in my conversations. Before I had conversations with a lot of adults in my life about race on a consistent basis, I realized that a lot of times when it would come up in my conversations, I most of the time would sit and be kind of quiet. And that was because I did not feel confident enough in myself to effectively communicate my thoughts and ideas about race in an appropriate and respectful manner, while also making sure that I was educated. I think it's so important for adults to talk to youth about race because it can help rebuild the confidence in a lot of people, like it did for me, and help them feel confident enough to carry out effectively communicated and appropriate conversations about race. I think it's also important for adults to talk to the youth in their lives about race because the more conversations about race that are had, the more we can make an uncomfortable topic a little more comfortable.
So Samara, I'm going to stick there with you and pick on you a little bit more. So you spoke to that previously when there were opportunities to engage adults about difficult conversations about race or racism or what you were seeing in the media and the news, you weren't necessarily comfortable. What, and it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like that has changed a little bit for you. So in that, what was impactful? What allowed you to step into that space and be more comfortable? What was it that those adults or those individuals did that helped you grow, or was it something that you did on your own?
I feel like it genuinely was a combination of both, but what the adults did that really helped me to have those conversations on a deeper level that overall helped me become more comfortable were that these adults, they came into the conversation being genuine listeners, and they did not take everything that I was saying as a personal attack. And they helped me find solutions to anything that I was struggling with, specifically related to race.
Awesome. And Charisse, I'm going to go back to you because this segues nicely into many people, or most people on the panel probably don't understand the nature of the student forums that we've hosted here, and that critical component that Samira is speaking to about the caregiver role in that setting. Can you speak to that critical component, and I don't want to give it away, that critical component that allows for that experience, but might be hard for adults to do because we're not used to doing it?
Well, I'm guessing you're thinking of how to make it comfortable for students, how to create that safe space for them.
In particular, what we tell the adults when we are moderating our student forums, there's a very strategic focus that we use that is often difficult for adults because we want to problem solve. So that's my carrot to you.
Okay.
Putting you on the spot.
I'm thinking of so many different things. If you could just let me know what you're referencing in particular. I don't want to go all through it. For these forums, we like to set the tone for these kids to make sure that we are not telling them what to say. We're not judging them. We're not, we don't want them to feel like we are not trustworthy. We create that space so that they can be open with us, so that they know this isn't a space that is scripted where we have slides on the screen and we're going to teach them something. We want this to be open. We want them to have dialogue, just like we're doing on this forum, where they can speak freely, and providing them that comfortable space that we're not here to judge them. I'm not sure if I tapped on that one element you're referring to, but we're very careful in those group settings to set the tone for them. And it's not a right away type of feeling for them. It takes some time to gain that comfortability. So if we're having an hour forum, it may take 15 minutes to actually get them to open up. And then our forums go on and on and on, because now after some time, they recognize that we are trusted adults and that we're here for them. Ultimately, when students share their voice, they want to feel heard, they want to feel valued, and they want to know that they matter. And not that we're just having a talk, but how do we put it in action? That is where our students are today. It's not just about talk. They want to see action following. And with that action, it's not for us to come up with the action. We give it back to them and have them come up with strategies to fix that, fix whatever that issues that they're facing, or help them or help guide them with their opinions and their perspectives so that they can come up with the solutions. Because it's all about student perspective. It's not the adult perspective. It's what they need. So in order for us adults to provide for them, we have to find out what they need. And when they tell us, we help direct them back to that and say, well, how do we resolve that? Come up with some suggestions so that us adults can support you in that. And that's where we speak about decision-making, advocacy, leadership, collaboration. Those things are essential in student voice, and that brings unity with the adults and the young people that we serve.
Thank you, Charisse. You hit on it perfectly. And one of the other things that I want to mention quickly, and then we continue to give our students the platform, is that in that space, as Charisse mentioned, there are times when you may not agree with the logic that
Absolutely.
the young person might have expressed. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't address things that are harmful. So we do that, but we do that in a way that doesn't seem like a critique or attack on their character. So we'll ask, and here's where that probing question comes in. Well, why do you think that? Here's why that might be harmful. I hear you, but. So we use that empathetic statement to get them to hear or restate what it is they're saying. And it allows their peers also to help them come to that decision. And so we're probing and we're asking those thought-provoking questions to help them rethink or reframe their thinking, but we're not telling them, well, that's wrong, that's racist, that's, we're addressing the narrative and we're addressing the statements or whatever could be harmful, but we're doing it in such a way that they don't feel attacked, they don't feel threatened, that they're able to discover maybe the flaw in that thinking on their own or through a constructive dialogue with their peers. So thank you, Charisse. Back to our students. So are there any other students who would like to answer the question that I posed first for Samira?
Yeah, I'd like to add. I'm gonna start by saying my name's Iomi. I'm a sophomore here at MHS, and I just feel like it's important to talk to youth about race because ultimately, having this difficult conversation can improve the bond between you and the person you're talking to. Because, for example, when I spoke with my aunt about some examples that we've seen and some things, and I was able to express myself, I just felt as though our bond was strengthened because I was able to trust her and she was able to trust me. And that shared trust just really gave me a place where I could express myself in a manner where I wouldn't feel judged or seen differently because of what I said.
Thank you, Iomi. Next question for our students. What should adults do to approach the topic? And I'm gonna segue this to kind of another portion of the question, because many times adults don't know how to approach the topic. We often feel that we know what's best, but we want to hear from the young people. What should adults do? How should we approach this topic? Who wants to answer that?
I would like to answer that question. Hello, guys. My name is Lyndon. I'm a junior here at Milton Hershey School. And first, I would like to just say that I believe that adults should know that going into this discussion that they're going to have to listen to students. And I think that it's important. I know Charisse had mentioned it, that they're going to have to validate the feelings of the students and just make them feel like they're being listened to, like what they say is important. I will also like to say that I think that's important that students feel like, I feel like that adults should be able to remain open-minded and just make sure that the conversation is dual-sided and make sure that it's just not a one-sided discussion. I feel like they should consider the people in their environment because I know not everybody is able to have this conversation because it is such a sensitive topic. And I think that just understanding the maturity needed to have this discussion is important. And I think relaying that to the students to make sure that they know that is very important. I think it's important that the students are encouraged to open up by the adults, that they're encouraged to use good terminology and just be a good example to the peers around them. Finally, I would just like to say that I feel like this conversation could lead to misunderstandings, and even the simplest misunderstanding could just increase missing communication and just relaying of the wrong ideas. And I feel like with this kind of discussion, that's the worst thing that you want. And I think at the end, you would like to just tie up any loose ends and just kind of ask for feedback from the students that you're talking to, and just being able to open up the floor and just being able to guide the conversation as adults, but not try to be too controlling.
Thank you, Lyndon. That goes back to what Mr. Presley was saying about checking in and checking back in and to make sure that what's the temperature? What are people feeling? Making sure that there aren't any, you're not leaving this space with misconceptions, right? Because then you're not better off than where you started. So thank you for that, Lyndon. And that kind of leads into my next question. When you spoke about what's needed in the trust and mending that, So I think, Iomi, I think you're the last on that has an answer. So I'm going to give this question to you. What does a safe space look like? How do adults create a safe space?
Thanks, Miss Abrokwa. A safe space really can be defined as a place where people come in with a growth mindset, and it's a judgment-free zone where people feel free to voice their opinions and express themselves without feeling that they'll be judged or seen differently as a result of doing so. It's also a place that where there is trust between both sides, and I think a great way of establishing this trust is by showing a little bit of vulnerability. By this, I mean, for example, like an adult, like the adult in the conversation could be willing to share some appropriate and relevant examples of some things they may have experienced. And I think by doing so, they'll be able to show that they're willing to lower their guard, which may help the student as well to feel comfortable to lower theirs. And by coming in with a growth mindset, I mean that this is ultimately a conversation where the goal should be to learn from each other and to be able to empathize with each other better. And doing so will just really aid both sides to learn from each other, because we grow up in two very different environments. Like, we have social media at our fingertips, and with that comes so many challenges and benefits. And it's important for us to be able to express how we see things, and as well as learn how the people before us have experienced things, and just learn from each other. And to speak on a judgment-free zone, I think Ms. Johnson, as well as many others, have spoken on this earlier with our MHS sacred values of just like mutual respect, positive spirit, integrity, commitment to mission. Like, just having that respect for each other and realizing that while our experiences may be different, neither is valued over the other. Like, we should be able to understand that although we're different, we're still equal. And I think that's very important when having this conversation. Also, just to how Mr. Presley and Lyndon talked about not being too assertive in the conversation. It's very important that students don't feel as if they're being like controlled or like forced into saying certain things by the adult. It's important that they feel free to express themselves and just not feel like they'll be judged.
Well, Iomi, I'm glad. Not that all the other panelists didn't do a phenomenal job, but that was well said as a wrap up to the student panelists. So you kind of just stole my thunder a little bit. So I'm going to have to reframe my mind here a little bit, Iomi. So thank you for that. And before we wrap up, I just want to highlight some wonderful key points, especially the key points from our young people on the panel. So overall, we heard that the key is to just really lean in and listen to young people. And with such a sensitive topic, and I'm going to speak for myself as well here, and what's common with adults when engaging young people in this discussion, we want to tell them what's right and what's wrong. And we do that in many of our life situations with our spouses. But I was just in a training today about stop problem solving all the time when people are trying to express and talk. So you've heard today that the key to starting the conversation is to lean in, to listen and probe versus telling them how to think. Help them discover, help them challenge their thinking and the thinking of others with the probing questions, the simple-ended questions. Have you asked your non-white friends what they're feeling and what they've shared? If not, why? What are you afraid of? How will you do this? What support do you think you will need? What should you think about first? And then another way you can take it a step further is to challenge by saying, I hear you, but have you thought of? Or I hear you, but here's why that might be offensive, etc. So those are ways that you can address the harmful narratives and stereotypes with active listening and empathy, versus if you do it in a more directive way, which can sound like an attack or a critique. So we know that difficult conversations are very uncomfortable, but we really want to challenge our community to absolutely step into that uncomfortable space and lean into the discomfort, because that's really where the change is going to occur. And like Heather said earlier, if we allow our fears of not engaging in these conversations with young people who are our next leaders and hopefully can course correct the mistakes of some generations before them, if we're not allowing them the platform to discover that and to help us with the solution, then we're crippling them in that. So we are nearing the end of our time together. I'm just going to quickly put these resources back up here on the screen for you. Keep in mind, again, they will be linked on YouTube and on our page, the all things diversity page for our committee. So please take a look at those resources there. And with that, I'm going to stop share here quickly with my screen, if I can get my tech working here. One second. Okay, we are back in gallery view here. And I think we have some time, a few minutes for some questions, hopefully from our audience. Let's see here. First question, and I apologize if I do not pronounce the name correctly. Karen said, this is a wonderful information. Will this be available to share with staff and faculty? Will this presentation be on the page as well? So yes, Karen, this information, this presentation has been recorded. It will be available on YouTube. We will actually, as Milton Hershey School, we hope to push this out to our community for additional learning. And I believe it will also be posted on the Hershey All Things Diversity page as well, Hershey Area All Things Diversity page as well. Thank you, wonderful question. Another question, someone wants to know if they can get a copy of the PowerPoint. Is this something that we can share? Again, we don't plan to share it out broadly, but we will have it available on the website. One new question. Second question, do you have some recommendations on how to overcome silences when opening discussions with youth? Absolutely. I am going to, because this is, I'm gonna put Charisse on the spot again, because she's the queen. She doesn't want to be the queen, but she is the queen of our student voice forums. And she does it so wonderfully in breaking that ice when we're in that setting with young people, and there's sometimes that awkward silence. Charisse, you want to speak to that? And if you want me to,
Sure.
I can.
Sure. What I tend to do is I try to meet the students where they are, period. I try to relate to them. I throw in some humor, ask some relatable questions that would get them talking. And I also remind them of the purpose. I remind them of why we're here, why we're talking about this, why the conversation started, and what they hope to get out of it. And so that reminder puts them back in the mental space of, yeah, this is something I really wanted to do, and this is what I wanted to talk about. So that pulls it out of them. And honestly, the opportunity for them to then speak to their thoughts and what they expected to get out of it will then open up and allow other young people to relate to what they're saying. When the young people feel like their peers share the same thoughts, it sparks conversation. I don't know why, but it does. And it lets them know that they are not alone in their thoughts. And that is something that really feeds to them, and it gives them a boost to then speak openly in those settings.
And thank you, Charisse. And back to those probing questions, sometimes you can lead with those, what do you feel? This is happening right now. And we know that they're watching, right? So setting that opening to say, this is what's going on in our country. This is what's going on in our nation. What are you feeling? What are you hearing about this? What are your thoughts about this? again, allows them to say, okay, this is my space, this is my time, is another opening that you can use.
And I'll just add one more word. Be realistic. They want that realness from the adults. They want to know that you see them and you understand, not that you're in their same position, but you can relate to them and you're going to be real in that conversation with them. They can read if you're being real or not. And that realness, if it's not there, they will shut down. So you have to be ready for that as well.
There's another question. I believe this is from Shelley. Thank you for this presentation. I think it's important to celebrate progress. Do you have examples on how we can do that while continuing the dialogue? I don't want to steal all the thunder from our phenomenal panelists. So is there anyone on the panel as well that would like to address that question? And if not, I certainly can. I thought I saw you itching to unmute yourself, Jerome.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I really liked to hear was identifying progress and celebrating progress. I think, we've seen over the course of a few years now that there's been a difficult time seeing progress. And I think that person that wrote that, to see that and identify there is progress even when we don't see that. And it's important to communicate that to our youth as well, because they may not see progress either from their perspective. So it's okay to dialogue about it. And I think it's important to celebrate the conversation itself by thanking them, by appreciating what they bring to the table, and as well as what you bring to the table when it comes to talking about this, at times can be a very difficult conversation. So in those, just acknowledging that part of it, I think becomes the celebration in itself, is making sure we acknowledge what our youth are doing. And again, I have two daughters. One of them, is a college student now, and I'm amazed at her viewpoint of the world and listening to her viewpoint. And we don't always agree. I mean, we all know as parents, we don't always agree with our kids, but at the same time, celebrating her ability to feel comfortable and strong enough to communicate her opinion and her thoughts is enough in itself for us to celebrate. And I enjoy celebrating that with her and with the youth that I work with every day. Giving them that forum to be able to communicate is a celebration enough.
So we're over time, but we have one more question. And this question is directed, well, first is the individual said, thank you to everyone, and especially the students. Question for the students: what is one piece of advice each of you would like to give the audience? What would you recommend at the best first step? So I see Samira on my screen. Well, I see Iomi, sorry, on my screen first. We'll start with you, Iomi.
I'd say one piece of advice that I would give to people that are looking to have this conversation is to just come in with an open mind, because it's important to just be willing to accept whatever you'll see and whatever you'll hear. It's just important that we can come in with the open mind and be willing to learn from each other, because I think that's how we'll really progress and see the change that we want to see.
Thank you, Iomi. Lyndon.
I feel like one of the biggest things that an adult can do is to really just be a role model and to really practice what they preach. Because I know many times you could just talk all day, but I think like actually going out there and making sure that you're diversifying your home or your student home or wherever it may be is a big part of really taking that next step to diversify yourself and
Thank you, Lyndon. And Samira.
Honestly, in my opinion, my best piece of advice would just be to start the conversation. Because again, like having any serious conversation, it's going to be uncomfortable at first, but the more you talk about something, the more that you become comfortable with it. And as you start to make something a part of your life, like Miss Gibbs and Mr. Small talked about, it becomes more normal to you. So you're going to be comfortable not only talking about it, but teaching other people about it too.
Well said, students. So with that, we're gonna close. But I want to thank all of my colleagues for taking the time out to share their thoughts on such an important, empowering topic. My sincerest thanks, especially during such a busy time in all of our lives as we prepare to wrap up our school year. So my sincerest thank you to you all. And to our student panels, a very special thank you as well. For taking the time out to join us this evening. To Susan, Brian, Beth, Amy, and All Things Diversity Committee members, thank you as well for allowing us the opportunity to share our thoughts with the community. And last but certainly not least, thank you to the audience for tuning in, and stay tuned for more from All Things Diversity. We thank you all and hope that you will find this information useful and share and have the confidence to lean in to necessary challenging